everybody. Welcome to the No Name Music Cast. My name's Tim, and this is
Joy.
And before we get into the topic this week, now, as many of you regular listeners will have heard, I did set Joy a task. It was a British cultural thing. I wanted to bring the work of Alan Partridge, Steve Coogan's Alan Partridge character, to Joy. Now, I know Joy last week watched Knowing Me, Knowing You, but this week she's been watching I'm Alan Partridge, which for me, especially the first season, is peak Partridge. There was a point in my life where all 6 episodes of that program, I could almost recite the script off the top of my head. So, with that in mind, Joy, what did you think of I'm Alan Partridge?
Okay, I liked it. It was better. I will say it was funnier. I love some of the opening lines whenever he's like at the radio and he's coming up with different things. But I have a question. He said REO Speedwagon, and then he said 70th Fast 4, and I just wrote, what? I didn't get the joke.
Well, he talks about
what was I missing?
He talks about REO Speedwagon being one of the biggest stadium rock bands in the world today, and then he starts telling the time in a wacky way, like 50 to 6 and 70 past something, and then he gets his calculator out, and he's like 1,700 and something to 12.
That whole thing went right past me. I was like, I thought it was an REO Speedwagon joke. I didn't realize he was just selling the time. So I was trying to figure out what was I missing. And then I basically just wrote down a few things that I thought were funny. A big thick of sick of Thin Lizzy could choke.
Yeah, big thick slice of Thin Lizzy.
Thin Lizzy. Yeah, I thought that was pretty funny. And then I wrote Cockadoodle who invented the skip.
Yeah, who invented? I don't know who invented the skip. Bobby Moore? I don't know who invented the skip.
And then there's a note that just says 20-foot high chickens question mark.
You got these chickens have got these massive sheds, and they don't know why they're so big, and they're thinking to themselves, why am I so massive?
And then also, I thought it was funny that I think they're talking about Al Capone at one point, and he says he dies of like an STI, but Al Capone actually died of a stroke and pneumonia, which I knew. So I just thought that was really funny.
Well,
and then also, yeah,
it's Alan Partridge. I mean, what do you expect?
I know. I thought that was extra funny. And then my favorite part, though, was who was it that bored me at the funeral? Fire him. Anyway, I just wrote down a bunch of
It was
quotes.
Peter Litton. He's just revamped Current Affairs. Well, fine. Well, he's revamped it. Get rid of him.
Fire him. Anyway, so that's what I got was, and a small Baileys. Who orders just a small Baileys?
Well, he ordered it for
like
Lynn. Yeah, he ordered it for Lynn because he was offering Lynn a drink, and she's like, "Oh, thank you." And he's like, "One small Baileys."
I just thought I was like, and no one have I ever seen anyone at a bar, because he orders that weird, he makes up some weird way of saying like a limoncello or lemon lime something, I can't remember what it was, and then he goes to small Baileys when he's talking to her, and he brings out basically what looks like a shot of Baileys. I don't think I've ever in my entire life of going to a bar seen anyone just drink Baileys. I don't know why, but that struck me so weird.
It's all part of the Alan Partridge drink, which is gin and tonic lager and Baileys, which is a lady boy, because, you know, some of them are ladies' drinks and some of them are boys' drinks.
Of course, I should have known. That all sounds very Alan Partridge. Well, I will say I liked it. I don't know I liked it as much as Tim. I'm not there yet, but I liked it more than Jillian. So there you go.
Yeah, it needs if you're into it, you need multiple viewings just to absorb every piece of information from it. That's
why all my notes are all just a bunch of like wacky quotes, because I'm like, what can't David has mince for breakfast? Like, what's happening? Anyway, yes, it's funny. If you haven't watched it, I suggest go do it just for some good laughs.
And there we go. And at this juncture, I would like to apologise to Jilbo. You have been welcome to skip past the first 5 minutes of this episode.
And we will lessen the amount of Alan Partridge things from Joy now that she's been introduced that we speak of on the podcast, so you don't have to hear it every week.
There you go, see. Well, fantastic. So we're going to get onto the topic this week, and it is my turn to pick. Now, I'm excited about this one, much like Joy was excited last week. However, what I want to talk about is probably a musical polar opposite to Joy's from last week. So last week we had the life and times of the Spice Girls from A to Z. And This week, I would like to talk about one of my favorite bands, and that would be the band Van Halen.
Yeah, that is pretty polar opposite.
Well, as you probably know, Van Halen are or were a popular hard rock band. Where Eddie Van Halen died, unfortunately, in 2020, and his son confirmed that was it. No more Van Halen. And I think that's a good thing, because Eddie was the heart and soul of the band. He wrote most of the songs, and his guitar playing was the band. So no Eddie, no Van Halen. So unlike some of these acts that go on forever with substitute players, the fact that they've drawn a line under it, I think, is as it should be.
I think so, too. And I mean, with his brother being in the band, too, it might have been awkward for him to go on without his other brother. You know, his brother is the drummer, so I get it.
Yeah, absolutely. So Van Halen are quite... well, actually, let me say how I'm going to run this. So I'm going to go through each of the albums and pick out a couple of songs, and we can discuss them from there. But one thing that's very unique about Van Halen is that they've had 3 lead singers during their time. They've had David Lee Roth, they've had Sammy Hagar, and also they've had Gary Cherone. Was you aware that Gary Cherone fronted Van Halen for a short period of time?
I knew there was a third guy, but I didn't know what his name was.
Yeah, it's the guy from Extreme.
Oh, yeah. That makes sense, though, because now I can visually see it. But no, I wouldn't have known that off the top of my head. Yeah,
from 96 to 2000, Gary Cherone fronted Van Halen, and they toured, and the album didn't do very well. The tour was very good, but I had tickets for it, but they cancelled the UK dates. So I've only ever seen video footage of the tour, but it was very well received. The funny thing about it is that Sammy doesn't really want to sing Dave's songs, and Dave would never, ever sing Sammy's songs. So depending on who was fronting the band at the time is what the set list you would get.
So whichever one you prefer, the two you went to, basically.
Yeah, but I mean, they went backwards and forwards with who was fronting it, and they'd fall out with one, and another one would come back, and it was a whole thing. One other interesting thing about Van Halen before we get into into each of the albums, they revolutionized the world of the contract rider. And you can go online and you can look at Beyonce's rider or Dave Grohl's rider, and it's like, yeah, the temperature must be this, and there must be 2 bars of soap, and it must be that, and there must
Gray
be this,
M&Ms
yeah, and all kind of stuff. That whole brown M&M thing comes from Van Halen,
which was smart.
And the reason it came from Van Halen, because it came from a time where they were bringing a stadium-style show to arenas. And in order to do that, there were certain requirements for rigging, and there were certain requirements for power, and the way the stage had to be set, and the audio system had to be set, and all that kind of stuff. And what they were finding is that they would get to venues, and they hadn't read the technical rider. And the stage was substandard, or the wiring was substandard, and it wasn't set how they wanted it. So what David Lee Roth did is that in the middle of a technical rider where it's talking about power and it's talking about staging and scaffolding and all this kind of stuff, and it says, and there will be a bowl of M&Ms backstage with no brown ones in it. So when they got there to sound check, they would look in their backstage area. And if there was M&Ms there and they hadn't had the brown ones taken out, they knew that they didn't read the technical rider.
And, what's interesting to me, though, is another thing that when it comes to the technical riders, that could be a safety issue, too, if it's not handled properly because of the way the show is set up. Remember we were talking about, was it Bret Michaels who ran into the thing?
Yes, absolutely.
That came down? Yeah. So, if you have a show, I get what you're saying. They're kind of rearranging it into a different arena type style. Also, though, if the lights don't go off or if a prop goes in the wrong place or something, not only could it make for a poor show, it could be dangerous for the people on stage if something like that happens.
Yeah, and in fact, I think it's Pink Floyd at Earl's Court I think it was the early 90s on the Pulse tour. Mm-hmm. They had a load of staging or a load of seats collapse.
Yeah.
So what I'm going to do is, as I said, I'm going to go album by album and go through some of these tracks. But as our regular listeners would know, we'll get 3 albums into this and we'll start talking about bus stops or something.
Accurate statements. Or you'll hear the talk about Tim, how Tim got stuck on a bus in Amsterdam or something.
I got stuck in the Channel Tunnel once.
Ooh. That doesn't sound
Have I
fun.
told you that story?
No.
Me and my friend Ian Gilding, who used to work in the travel industry, he used to get free or basically free tickets on the Channel Tunnel. And for people who don't know, the Channel Tunnel is a tunnel that runs under the seabed between England and France. And the way that it works is if you travel with your car, you drive down to Folkestone, you drive your car onto the train, and then that whole train goes under the sea, and it's about 35 minutes. And then you come out the other side. And one clever thing is you clear French customs on UK soil. So you come out the other end, they open the doors of the train, you all come out, and you're straight on the autoroute and you're into France. Cool system. I mean, even by the time you've checked in, it's probably an hour and a half and you're in France. You know, it's super quick.
Yeah.
So we had this ticket, and we went into the Channel Tunnel. And do you remember there was a fire in the Channel Tunnel?
I do remember that being on the news.
This was after that. So they were reducing on a reduced tunnel service. So one tunnel was complete and then the other tunnel was half closed. So it was already a compromised service and it was not as quick as it should be. So we go into this tunnel and the train stops. And I thought, oh, nothing's ever good's going to come of this. And it didn't do anything. And it stopped and it stopped and it stopped. And we was in it for 3 hours, 4 hours, maybe. It was such a long time. And then they started coming around with these little cards for you to fill in to get your money back. And I was going to get one. And my friend Ian said to me, he said, no, you can't take that. He said, this is a free ticket.
Ian, shut up. That's funny. I got stuck inside the ball at Epcot.
Oh.
On the little thing. So I don't know if you've ever been to Disney World, but the Epcot ball you see in all the pictures, it has a little ride in it that like you go up it. It's like in space and it's dark or whatever, and you're watching. And me and my mom went on it, and it floats you around, and then it gets all dark, and we got stuck there for like 30 minutes.
Oh dear.
Inside the Epcot ball. So that happened.
But at least
all right, back to Van Halen. There we go.
There we are. All right, so I'm going to start with Van Halen 1, which came out in February 1978. And this album, if you've ever listened to US classic rock radio, they more or less play everything off this, give or take.
I could agree with that.
So what do you have on here? You have Running with the Devil. You have Really Got Me, which is the Kinks cover. You have Ain't Talking About Love, Jamie's Crying, Ice Cream Man. I mean, if you put on WROV, the Rock of Virginia, which is our local FM classic rock station, at any given time of the day, you can probably hear one of those.
The other day, I was too lazy to hook up my phone and was clicking through radio stations, and Jamie's Crying was playing.
Well, there you go, see. Yeah.
And I could hear him going, literally, the chorus is Jamie's Crying, and that's the part I was on. And I was like, click. As good as it is, I can't hear it again.
Well, that's the problem, you see, is that these songs are so good, but they're so hideously overplayed.
Yeah, and You Really Got Me is already a cover of the Kinks, so...
Yeah, I mean, and the funny thing is there's a whole generation of people who thinks You Really Got Me is by Van Halen. They don't even know of the Kinks.
I know, and there was another one. Oh, speaking of that, so in what song was it? Mariah Carey's, there's a Mariah Carey song from the early 90s. What is it? Oh, I just had this whole type of thing with Charlie where he was like, that's the original. And I'm like, no, it's not. And we went back and forth and I had to find the original. And it dawned on me that like you're saying, there's a whole generation of people who probably don't know that.
It's I'll Be There from the MTV Unplugged session. The Michael Jackson or Jackson's cover.
Well, this one's the Fantasy. The song Fantasy is a remake of another song.
Oh, it's Sugar Hill Gang.
Yeah. Fantasy sample Mariah Carey. Hold on, let's just answer it. Oh, Genius of Love, Tom Tom's Club from 1981. Yeah, sorry. That's it.
Mistaken. Yeah, Tom Club, not Sugar Hill Gang.
And it's literally the same background, like the words and everything are the same. But Charlie was like, "Are you sure that this is?" And I was like, "Yes, I'm sure it was used before," because I was like, it was sampled from something. I couldn't remember it. I googled it. I found it, and we got a whole debate about this. And then, like you're saying, it dawned on me that like there's probably a whole genre of people who don't know that.
Yeah, in the same way that some people think "Live and Let Die" is by Guns N' Roses.
Which now is in my head. Thank you, radio stations who play that in America every 5 minutes. But I mean, What is one thing that you think is what is one that you always think of when people talk about remakes? I mean, obviously, everybody thinks like Dolly Parton and Whitney Houston, I Will Always Love You. But what's one that you think people don't realize? I told you I had that whole realization that every Will Smith song samples another song one day.
Yeah, I don't know if it's certainly not one that's not known, but the classic one that always comes to me is Joe Cocker's "A Little Help from My Friends," because it's a new song. It has the same chords sort of, and it has exactly the same lyrics, but it is a brand new song. And I'm sure there were people at the time, now the Beatles, every Beatles song is super legendary and everyone's heard it a thousand times. But I'm sure at the time there was a few people that thought, who's this? Was this a Beatles song? What's going on?
That's true. Yeah, I can agree with that. All right. What else was on the Van Halen album we were just naming?
Well, I mean, you've got a bunch of other album tracks that are not as popular, but I mean, the ones that I read off are most certainly the ones that are completely played to death on US classic rock radio.
Well, and I think that Van Halen's kind of gotten like this kind of, for people who listen to classic rock, they're ranked really high up there in the category. So I think they're on the top of the playlist for most things. But like you said, it's a handful of 5 songs with that and Jump.
Exactly. And I should say that Van Halen 1 is with David Lee Roth, who is the original lead singer of Van Halen. So,
do you have a preference, Tim?
See, I started out, I'll come on to it when we get to the album, but I started out being a Sammy Hagar fan. I discovered Van Halen with Sammy Hagar, and I went back after the fact and bought the David Lee Roth era albums. I've seen Van Halen 4 times, twice with Sammy and twice with Dave. And it's a different band and a different show. I think whilst Dave is the frontman, he is the ultimate frontman, completely the ultimate frontman. He is not a good singer. He was not a good singer in peak Van Halen, i.e. Van Halen 1, Van Halen 2. What he is the ultimate showman and the ultimate frontman. Sammy Hagar is a significantly better singer and a significantly better songwriter. And I think in terms of longevity, Sammy is 74, just turned 74. He's still touring with his band, The Circle. He's still putting new music out. He's still having a great time. He still
has long curly hair.
Yeah, and he looks like he's about 50. But
he's very tan.
Yeah. And I think he'll go on and on and on as long as his health allows him, and he'll always be Sammy Hagar that you know. Dave, as I said, was not a good singer. He's about to retire this December. I think he's playing New Year's Eve and a few gigs, and he announced his retirement, and he said, I'm not doing music anymore. And I have a live album of theirs from Tokyo Dome that was released a few years ago, and it's a completely unedited live album, and his vocals are horrific. And I mean, I can't really sing. I could probably sing those songs better than he did. But equally, if you was in the room with Dave, that's the best show you've ever seen.
Because it's all about the showmanship for him.
Yep.
And I mean, I have to think, and maybe this is me being skeptical. Sometimes when you have classic rock singers, they're not singing technically well. So their vocal cords get really worn out on top of drugs, alcohol, and hard life. Yeah, so that probably contributes to when you're 80 and attempting to sing.
That's true. I mean, Dave likes to party. I'm sure he's indulged in all the things that life offers as far as partying is concerned. But
I would assume so.
Yeah, but I mean, he's the ultimate rock and roll frontman. I mean, there was Sammy Hagar and David Lee Roth did a tour together, the Sam and Dave tour, where like their solo bands played backwards and forwards. Mm-hmm. And there was a quote, they did a documentary, MTV did a documentary, and there's a quote at the end from David Lee Roth. And he says, Sammy Hagar, he said, he's cabo wabo and all that. He throws a great party. Me, I am the party.
What a statement. Well, at least he knows who he is. All right, next album, Tim.
Okay, well, imaginatively, the next album that Van Halen came out with in 1979 after their famous debut is called Van Halen 2. Very imaginative.
Really taking the creative side there.
Yeah, I think they were probably channeling Led Zeppelin, because Led Zeppelin have Led Zeppelin 1, Led Zeppelin 2, 3, 4, and all that kind of stuff. So I'd imagine they were probably channeling that. I can give you a fun fact, not this copy I have in my hand, but my original CD copy of this I bought in Perth, Australia in 1998.
That's very specific.
Because I remember buying it in a music shop.
I thought there was going to be more to that quote, but it just ended.
No, I was in a process of discovering the David Lee Roth era, and I didn't have it. And I was in a music shop when I was on holiday in Perth, and I saw it there, and I went, "Oh, I don't have Van Halen 2," and I bought it, and then I bought it.
And you walk away with it. Okay, sorry, I don't know why, but I just expected something at the end of that. Okay.
And interestingly, I also bought Kiss's Psycho Circus in the same shop. And a kind of bizarre callback, Van Halen were discovered by Gene Simmons from Kiss, and he bankrolled their demo.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and the reason he did that is because he wanted Eddie for Kiss to replace Ace Frehley, but he didn't want to do that. He wanted to stick with his brother in the band, and their bankroll demo is how they get signed to Warner Brothers, and that's how they ended up doing Van Halen 1.
Well, I mean, that makes sense, though. I could see that because the larger than life tech show through Kiss and how that would fit in.
Yeah.
Well, what songs do you like on this album particularly, Tim?
Well, I would say Van Halen 2 isn't as good as Van Halen 1, and it suffers from that classic thing where you have a band and you tour and then you refine your show and you write all your songs, and you've been doing this for a number of years because they started out playing covers in backstage back garden parties and things like that, and then they started playing clubs, and then they started writing songs, and then they started getting this set, and that set is reflected on the Gene Simmons demo and Van Halen 1. So of course you get to Van Halen 2, and where's all your material gone? You've got to start from scratch.
I've seen that happen before.
So
it seems like it's the B side of the original album.
Exactly. So it's got Dance the Night Away on it. That's a song which again is another one that's probably burnt out of US classic rock radio. And it's got Beautiful Girls. I think that's another one that they play on ROV and the like. The other tracks are probably what you'd call deep tracks.
I feel like I've heard DOA before on the radio. Yeah,
they may have played that. Well, when Van Halen started touring again with Dave in sort of 2006 or so, the classic rock radio started deep diving back into the David Lee Roth's albums.
But you're right, I haven't heard it as much. Isn't there one like You're No Good or something like that on that album?
I think that's on one of the ones that we're gonna come to.
Oh. Never mind. I'm skipping ahead, everybody.
One interesting fact is on the back cover of Van Halen 2, Eddie Van Halen is playing one of his famous stripy guitars, which is known as the Bumblebee, which is not the black, white, and red stripy one that you would probably even see him if you saw a photograph of him now. The Bumblebee is a black and yellow stripe guitar.
Well, that would make sense since it's a Bumblebee.
Yeah, and are you familiar with the hard rock band Pantera?
I've heard of them before.
Yeah, the guitarist Dimebag Darrell sadly got murdered on stage.
Yeah. I think we even talked about that in one of the episodes.
Yeah. And he apparently was a huge Van Halen fan. You know, he loved Van Halen, and I think he knew Eddie Van Halen towards the end of his life, or had connections to the Van Halen camp, whatever. Anyhow, Dimebag was buried in a Kiss casket. Because, for a while, Kiss was selling caskets. So he was buried in a Kiss casket, and Eddie Van Halen gave him, well, obviously he's dead, but gave him the Bumblebee, and then the Bumblebee is buried with him in the Kiss casket.
That's pretty cool. See, I think we talked about him because one of the episodes I may have talked about when he was killed. But I remember we also talked about the Kiss casket. I think you mentioned that he was buried in one before.
There you go. Yeah.
I wonder how many people out there are actually buried in a Kiss casket. How much do you think that thing was worth? It had to be worth a lot of money, right?
I would imagine the bulk of the Kiss caskets ended up being in people's game rooms with bottles of beer in them and things like that.
It's their cooler for their next. That makes sense.
But,
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things, but I don't think I want to be buried in a Kiss casket.
Well, I mean, it sort of it has the. I don't know. I mean, I don't even want to think about things like that, but it's slightly more rock and roll than one that's made out of pine or something. I don't know. Well,
see, I don't want to be buried at all. I just want to be cremated. So I guess for me, it doesn't really matter.
I want to be buried and turned into a tree.
That's what I want to do. I want to, they cremate you and put you in the little tree thing.
Well, there's this thing where they bury you as you are, and they put you in some kind of fetal position, and then they bury you and they put you in like this tube type thing, and then they put like a sapling on at the top of the plot. So as your body breaks down, your nutrients make the tree.
See, I've seen one that was with where you were cremated and they put your remains in like the part of the bottom of the tree, I guess, and then they plant it. And so whatever your remains were there, it helps give nutrients to the tree. So that's kind of weird because I want to be a tree too, Tim. I've thought about this.
Yeah, I've given it I haven't given it a lot of thought, but
okay, well, yeah. So don't put us in the kiss. Don't put me and Tim in the kiss caskets, but we would be turned into a tree.
There you go.
Yeah, makes sense. And then so we could cut down the tree, Tim, and make a guitar out of it, and it could be in honor of you.
I mean, this is and then someone could write a song, and then it could be something else, and.
That's how you will live on. Okay, we need to focus.
Exactly. All right. So we will move on to the next Van Halen album, which is called Women and Children First, which came out in 1980.
Okay.
The tracks on here that you would probably be familiar with, do you know Romeo's Delight or Tora Tora? They're kind of deep tracks.
Romeo's Delight. I've never heard Tora Tora.
There is the main track on here that you have probably heard of is "And the Cradle Will Rock."
Yeah, I've heard that plenty of times before.
Yeah,
I've got it on playlists.
Yeah, that's an FM rock radio staple. The interesting thing about it is the riff that plays all the way through it is Eddie Van Halen playing a Wurlitzer organ plugged into a Marshall guitar amplifier.
Huh. Now that I'm trying to, I didn't go silent because that was weird. I was just trying to think of how the song goes to imagine what that sound is like. Interesting. Because see, we used to have, when I was younger, the house that I grew up in originally was the house that came from my grandparents. And we had a lot of the old church instruments, and we had organ. So I learned to play the organ and stuff when I was little, mostly because it always had all the notes written on it. If you don't know this about organs, Tim, most of the time the notes are written on it. I don't know if you know that, like the keys are all labeled so like anyone can play an organ, like the old school church one. So we had two of those. We had the piano that was in the church that my mom went to originally when she was, so like all that stuff. So I'm very familiar with organs, and like I used to, when I was little, pretend like I knew what I was doing and bang around on them. So like for me, I was sitting there trying to think of what I knew, what sounded like and what it would be like in an amp, and I can't understand it in my brain.
Yeah, you just imagine your organ sound, but more distorted because it's plugged into a 100-watt Marshall Super Lead Plexi.
I mean, yeah, I guess that makes sense. And thinking of the song, it kind of has that sound.
Yeah,
organ should be used in more mainstream music.
Yeah, I never clocked that it was a Wurlitzer organ until I read it in a guitar magazine. And when you listen to it back, it's like, oh yeah, it is. It's some kind of organ.
That makes sense, though. I mean, I'm sure that was probably more advanced organ than the little electronic ones we had floating around my house that my grandmother inherited. Anyway.
But there you go. All right, so we will go from there to the Fair Warning album. Now, Fair Warning came out in 1981, and we're still with David Lee Roth at this point. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people say this is the sort of darkest and moodiest of the Van Halen albums. Probably the track there's two tracks on here that you would probably know. One is Mean Streets, which has that kind of double two-handed tapping guitar thing in it, and Unchained. And Unchained is probably the one that you've heard on classic rock radio.
Well, I have this album. This is one of the ones I do have. And I think part of the reason why I guess it's dark in the sense the music's a little bit darker, but I think the album cover is kind of creepy.
Yeah, because if you, it's actually taken from a big piece of artwork, and it's just like cut into four squares. And in fact, if you open the booklet up, it opens up into the whole.
It's like almost like a brain kind of, but sideways, and like they zoomed in on like the four pieces.
Yeah, and there's somebody punching someone, and someone headbutting a wall, and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot to unpack, but a lot of people do say that this is kind of the less party sounding. A lot of the David Lee Roth music tends to sound like a great party's going on, and this is kind of a little bit more dark and brooding.
Yeah, I was just thinking that maybe the album cover kind of play. It was, symbolic of the fact that the album was a little darker too. They made the album cover dark. And then there's also, I know Push Comes to Shove was on there, and So This Is Love was played everywhere to the history of time, I think. But I feel like So This Is Love was used in a lot of movies.
Yeah, I think it is. I think I've heard of it being used for things like that.
Because he does have a really nice voice when he sings those type songs. Very distinct pitch, very almost like soft sound, I guess. Mm-hmm. So that would make sense why that one's used a lot.
Exactly. Well, there we go. So we go from there and we go to the Diver Down album, which is from 1982. And this album is sort of kicking up a little bit with the party sound. They've had their Dark and Brooding album, and this is their kind of kicking back up. One thing that this album has is a lot of cover tracks. David Lee Roth was super into having reworked cover songs, but Eddie Van Halen was not so keen on just playing other people's music because he wanted to play his own songs and his own riffs and stuff like that.
So this is the one with Pretty Woman and...
That's correct. That's correct. You've got Where Have All the Good Times Gone? You've got Pretty Woman. You've got Dancing in the Street.
In the Street. That's the other one. I actually like their version of Dancing in the Street too. But Dancing in the Street, it's not just them who've done covers of that song. I think that song's been covered like 7 times. I swear I've heard many different versions of that song.
Oh, I'm sure if you looked it up, there's 50 different cover versions of Dancing in the Street.
It's kind of like what is that one song that you hear, We're the Kids of America?
Mm-hmm.
I think there's probably 30,000 versions of We're the Kids of America.
Sure.
I swear I've heard it, and every time you hear it, it's just a distinct. It's the same song, but it's distinctly different because someone else is singing it. I've heard male, female versions, so I think that's true of Dancing in the Street as well.
Everyone knows the definitive version of Kids in America is by Moroccan Soul off the demo of about 2004.
Yeah, specifically, guys, if you haven't heard that one, go find it.
maybe it might be on the YouTubes if you have a look in there.
Everybody's like, what is going on?
Now,
Tim's a little biased.
Now, one thing that's interesting about Diver Down, there's a track on here called Big Bad Bill is Sweet William Now. And what's unique about it, it's very out of character for Van Halen. It's like a jazzy standard. If it's not a cover, it's written to sound like a jazz standard. But what's interesting about it is Eddie Van Halen, Alex Van Halen's father, Jan Van Halen, plays clarinet on it.
Dang, I didn't even know that. Wow, the Van Halens really have the music kind of thing going for them. Yeah, because isn't there a Wolfgang Van Halen too?
Yeah, Wolfgang Van Halen is Eddie Van Halen's son.
That's the son. Okay, I couldn't remember which one that was because there's Alex, there's Eddie, there's Wolfgang, and now what did you call this guy?
This is Jan Van Halen, their father.
Well, they must be really big musicians in that family.
Yeah, they're all from Holland. They're all from Nijmegen, Holland. And they came over to the United States when Eddie and Alex were very much younger. They both Eddie and Alex spoke fluent Dutch because they were born and raised in Nijmegen, Holland. And apparently, when they were touring, when they used to feud like brothers like to feud, they started shouting at each other in Dutch. And all the crew would be like, "Oh no, they started off on the Dutch thing again. I'm gonna leave them.
We're out. Good luck." Well, the closest thing I have to that is I'm a twin. And my mom said when me and my twin sister were little, we had our own language. Like when we were like 3 to 4 years old, we would talk to each other in our own language. Okay. Don't know what it was, but we did, apparently. We knew what we were saying.
And you was able to communicate with your sister in your own made-up language?
Yeah. And if you Google it, apparently it's common among twins. I don't know if we could actually understand each other like the way you understand English or like certain things just meant certain things to us. I have no clue. But yeah, as twins, we could talk to each other from like 2 to 4 just with different sounds and stuff. And honestly, as an adult, that sounds kind of creepy to me now. But I did it.
Well, there you go. At least you weren't screaming at your sister in Dutch, I suppose.
It could have been Dutch. My parents would have known. At least I don't think.
But there we go. Anyhow, we're going to move on to the next Van Halen album. So the next Van Halen album comes out in 1984, and it is the album 1984. And many consider this album certainly to be peak Dave, but it's also peak Van Halen. Really, this is in the David Lee Roth era. This is probably as good as it gets. Like the first album is seen as like the one to have, but 1984 that's the thing. What do you have on here? You have Jump, you have Panama, you have Hot for Teacher on here, you have I'll Wait,
Girl Gone Bad.
Yep, it's all House of Pain. All the tracks on here are like first class. And of course, this came out in the MTV era. So of course you had the video for Jump, you have the video for Panama where Dave's suspended on a big thing and he's going over the stage. And of course you have the famous Hot for Teacher video.
Yes, I was going to say, I think that this one is one that stands out to me the most because I've seen all the music videos. So I'm glad you said that. And I think the album cover is their most iconic album cover with the little baby with the wings or whatever.
Yeah, there's a little kid with wings smoking cigarettes.
Yeah, I think that when I associate like something with Van Halen, that picture comes to mind. I'm not even sure, why, but I think I've seen it enough. And I have a funny story about Jump. So Jump, which if you guys have never heard it, go Google it. I'm not going to sing it, but you get the idea. It's about jumping, kind of. There was on Glee. Just listen. They did a version of Jump. And what it was, I can't even say this straight. It's so stupid. So they won mattresses from a local mattress store. But how they won the mattresses is they had to record a singing video for it. So it's them jumping on the mattresses while singing Jump by Van Halen. And it's a masterpiece. I will show it to you, Tim. It is a masterpiece. But yeah, you see them just like flying across from one mattress to the next, and it's going, go ahead and jump. The next one comes. And every time I think of Jump from Van Halen, that's all I can see now. Thank you, Glee.
See, I was going to tell a story about the Hot for Teacher video, but I think you've usurped me with your Glee story.
It's so dumb, but it's so amazing. I don't know why. One of those things that sticks with me.
Marvelous.
And it's not like the song's very technically hard or anything, so it just makes it funnier. Anyway.
Exactly. Okay, so the next album from Van Halen comes out in 1986. There has been what they call a sea change in the Van Halen world. Diamond David Lee Roth leaves the band or is fired from the band, depending on which set of accounts that you choose to believe.
I think I've heard both.
But yeah, Diamond Dave is no more. So who do they bring in? They bring in veteran artist Samuel Roy Hagar, Sammy Hagar. And he
was so pretty back in the day.
With his hair and...
Oh, he's not now. But back in the day, he was very pretty.
Well, like, Sammy Hagar, he's 74, but as we said, he looks like he's about 50, so...
I mean, I'll give it to him. I'm not necessarily attracted to 50-year-old Sammy Hagar, but Sammy Hagar in 70s to 80s was a very pretty man.
In the, like, I Can't Drive 55 video and stuff like that.
Yeah, he was very pretty. He had very nice bone structure and nice teeth. In case anybody was wondering, go Google that later.
Yeah, 1980s Sammy Hagar. Look for the bone structure and the teeth.
The teeth.
Well, so...
Anyway, what's with the music?
So he joins Van Halen, and the reason he got this gig, classic rock and roll story... Eddie Van Halen and Sammy Hagar both shared the same Ferrari technician, and the Ferrari technician said, I've heard that David Lee Roth has left Van Halen. You should give Eddie Van Halen a call. And that is how he got the gig in Van Halen.
I can't believe I've never heard that
It's
before.
true.
It's so Van Halen if I've ever heard it.
Exactly. I mean, it's not... I mean... The last time I took my car to the Nissan garage for an oil change, the guy who came out didn't say, "Oh, local band 7 Mile Ford need a guitar player." That's never happened. But obviously, I'm not going to a Ferrari garage.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the difference, Tim. I don't think if I take my Dodge Journey to go get the wheels changed, they're going to introduce me to the newest pop duo. Could be wrong, but it seems unlikely.
But there you go. So we get 5150, which is the name of the album, which is a police code for somebody who is criminally insane. And that is the name of Eddie Van Halen's home studio, 5150. And also, he released 5150 amps and 5150 guitars and guitar strings and straps. It became a brand, as it were. But
he knew where the money was.
Yeah, but it all starts with this album, 5150. Now, 5150 has got another few tracks that, of course, you probably know. Why Can't This Be Love? Best of Both Worlds, Love Walks In, Get Up, Dreams, Summer Nights, and the track 5150. But certainly, Why Can't This Be Love and Love Walks In and Best of Both Worlds are probably ones that you've heard 100 times.
Well, Why Can't This Be Love is another one that I think I've heard used in TV shows, movies, all that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I mean, I've heard that probably, and like you said, on all the local radio stations. That's one of the few ones they play of them for whatever reason. I don't know if I've ever even heard 5150, though. Like, I don't think I've ever heard this song, which is weird. I'm going to have to go look it up afterwards. But I guess it would have been released as a single since it was for the album, I would think.
I think so. They used to play it in concert. It has a riff in it which is very much down-tuned. And I know Eddie Van Halen would remove the low E string from his guitar and put a bass string in there and then down-tune it. You may have heard it. It was probably more of an album track than something that was released as a single.
I'll have to go give it a Google because I'm just curious. But yeah, I would definitely say out of everything you just said, Why Can't This Be Love would be the definite one that I've heard about 1,000 times.
Exactly.
I can agree with that.
And just as a just to follow up, this CD, not this CD I have in my hand, but my original copy of 5150, I bought in Gatwick Airport on the way to a trip to Vienna in Austria.
We're going to have to do an episode that's just Tim telling us what places he bought which albums.
Well, sadly, none of the ones I have here are the originals because I sold my entire music collection in the early 2000s, ripped it all digitally, and then regretted it probably 10 years after the fact. So I'm now rebuying my collection to make up for all the ones I sold. But I'm lucky to have a good memory, so I could probably tell you the ones I've replaced from my originals more or less exactly where they all came from.
That's good. Now, I will say, we almost had a fiasco today, but Tim was almost saved from the fact that he's obsessed with physical media. So while I was at work and while Tim was at work, I got a message saying our internet was out. I called my internet provider and there was no ETA on when it was going to be back up. So me and Tim were discussing how we were going to do the recording. While Hannah was very concerned about cartoon watching, Tim was going to be lucky if he had no internet because he could go to the physical media. My husband was just disappointed that he couldn't do anything on the internet and resorted to actually putting the laundry away. So it really was a win for me.
but I tell you, I mean, you know, I've always liked offline media, whether it's physical media like CDs and things like that, or files that are ripped to my computer. I don't stream music, but, you know, I watch YouTube. I have the Discovery Plus at the moment because I'm watching Mythbusters. And, you know, we have Amazon Prime streaming type thing. So I touch that world to some degree, but I do like having the files. So if the internet goes out, it's a pain. But I can still exist on copies of the A-Team or Airwolf or something I have stashed away on my machine.
Tim will make it. Were you, whenever the power went out 2 years back, whenever I was without power for like 3 days and half of the town was, did you have power or no?
We lost power last winter, and it was like just for a day. And what happened is one of the poles in the town caught fire. Do you remember that? I think you remember.
Yeah, I was the one who wrote you and sent you a picture.
Yeah, and I think I knew the power was out or was going to go out. And I have a tablet, which I sometimes watch on my lunch break, which has all the media on it cached, because obviously I don't want to connect it to anything in the office, so it's just completely separate. So I knew the power was out, so I brought it home with me, and then I think I just watched what was on there. It was like Charlie's Angels or something like that. I can't remember.
2 years back when we had that giant snowstorm and like it was the really wet, heavy, big snow and like half the town was out power. We were out for like 3 days and I had a few things that I had downloaded from Hulu. And I said, right now would be a really good time for me to buy. And I still haven't done it. I should just buy an old school radio. I know it's boring. I know I'll hear your top 50 songs, but it was better than me just staring at the walls like I did that day.
I think I think what you need to do is get a large enough hard drive, and then I'll fill it for you, and then you'll never have to worry.
I will say I have quite a few external hard drives that are around my house, so I think we would make it. I will say then a few weeks back, we lost power for like an hour, and I listened to vinyl. I did the old school thing and put my record player on, so I had that.
Well, there you go. I mean, we're lucky. Where we live, we're on the same grid as the police, the fire department, and the town hall. So if the power goes out, it doesn't go out for long.
See, I am not. I'm farther away from about 5 minutes the other direction from Tim, and I live right off of where. And Virginia has this thing where they don't remove their trees near power lines. Like when I was in Florida, my dad used to always talk about you couldn't have a tree within, I think it's like 10 yards of the road and 10 yards of a power line because of all the tropical storms. Mm-hmm. So that way, if the tree falls, it doesn't knock out everything. But Virginia does not do that. And we literally have trees growing in our power lines. So, you know.
I think it's like jobs for the boys type thing. It's like, well, we won't get rid of the trees from the power lines because then it will break the power line. So then we have to send a power line crew and a tree crew.
Mm-hmm. The other thing is, I wonder if it could play into the whole, like, trying to save the environment type side of it too, which I understand. Virginia has a very pretty area, so that would make sense. But anyway, I have no idea how we got to that conversation. Van Halen.
Okay, so we follow up 5150, still with Sammy Hagar on lead vocals, with the album OU812. And the reason it's called OU812 is because David Lee Roth released an album called Eat 'Em and Smile. That was his first solo release after leaving the band. So they released an album saying, "Oh, you're 812, OU812." I don't know if you knew that.
OU812. No, I didn't, but I get it. Pretty good. I'll give him that. I wonder how long it took for them to figure out, like, I wonder if he knew instantly when he heard it, he was like, wait a second. That sounds like that's about me.
Well, I'm sure David Lee Roth didn't actually care because even though he's a rock star and he parties and all that kind of stuff, he would go to the Amazon for 6 months or something. He's always having adventures. A lot of rock stars stick their money up their nose, but David Lee Roth will live in Japan for 2 years, or he'll go on a trek down the Amazon, or he'll go to Everest, or.
I feel like that's the way to do it, though. That makes it sound way funner.
Yeah, he lives life with the money he has. He lives life absolutely to the fullest.
Well, I'll give him that. So he didn't care.
So he probably didn't care that the Van Halens were making fun of his album. But anyway, this album, the main track off here that you've probably heard, well, there's two actually. Finish What You Started.
Yeah.
And When It's Love.
When It's Love, I probably heard more than Finish What You Started.
Yeah. Also, you have the track on here, Cabo Wabo. And Cabo Wabo, which I've heard. The track on here is talking about the club in Cabo St. Lucas in Mexico. And originally, all the Van Halens were investors in this Cabo Wabo club. And then when Sammy Hagar left Van Halen, he bought out the Van Halen brothers. But around the same time, he launched his tequila company and decided to call it Cabo Wabo too. And recently, in the last 10 years, he sold Cabo Wabo tequila for $100 million and still kept a controlling interest. So I think the Van Halen brothers probably didn't do the right thing. Anyway, the club's still there. I really want to go to the Cabo. I've been to the Cabo Wabo in what's the name? I went to the one in Vegas, and I've also been to the one. I can't remember where it was. Anyway, I've been to another one too, and they're good fun to go. And
I've drank the tequila. And I've tried the tequila before.
Yeah, they're like Hard Rock cafes, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I've had the tequila before, but I've never been to any of them, and I don't know that I had any association with who it was. I've just had that tequila before. Yeah.
Yes, I mean that says something, that the Cabo Wabo brand has completely existed outside the world of Van Halen and Sammy Hagar.
Yeah, like I'm pretty sure I've had that brand of tequila before, but I didn't have any clue who it was.
Yeah.
It feels like every artist nowadays is in the alcohol business. Have you noticed that? Or is that just me?
No,
That's
you're right.
A popular thing to do.
I think it was Sammy Hagar that started that together with Jimmy Buffett.
Yeah, I would say so. Because and even it's not just musicians, like The Rock. Dwayne The Rock Johnson, he has, I think, a tequila. Ryan Reynolds has a tequila, or no, he's a gin. And his wife used it in a movie. And I was like, way to advertise for your husband there. It's called Aviator or something. But that seems to be the thing now, is still they start your own alcohol. So maybe they did start that.
Maybe. I think it may have come from Sammy, or if it didn't come from Sammy, it came from Jimmy Buffett.
Didn't we talk about another artist's wine that you were talking about one time?
Oh, Cliff Richard.
Yeah. He had wine, apparently.
Only in Portugal.
Only in Portugal, though. Very specific.
So, we go a few years. Sammy Hagar is still with Van Halen. And we get to the album For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge. Now, this album came out in 1991, and you don't have to be a genius to work out what the title means if you just use the acronyms of those words.
So there's a Britney Spears album that's If You Seek Amy. And if you say it fast enough, you'll get what I'm trying to go for.
Absolutely. Well, there you go. And the interesting thing about the For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge album is this is the album I discovered Van Halen on. I have read about Van Halen in guitar magazines. I just started playing guitar in the early 90s, or probably late 80s, early 90s. And I knew of the band, but I didn't really know any of their music. And the 1991 MTV Music Video Awards, they opened the show with Pound Cake off this album. And we had satellite TV, and it was a live feed of US MTV, and they had Van Halen opening. And I stayed up to like 3 o'clock in the morning or something to watch it live. So this, in my music world, this is a very pivotal album. That
album specifically.
And also, Eddie Van Halen on here plays the Ernie Ball Music Man Eddie Van Halen guitar, which is the same kind of guitar that I play. And the reason I play that kind of guitar is from this album.
That album. Well, what songs on it speak to you, Tim?
Well, Pound Cake's good. I like Judgment Day. I like Spanked. Runaround's good. Man on a Mission. And probably the big like MTV song off this album is Right Now.
Yeah, I would say that. And that one's another one I think I've seen in car commercials.
Oh, and it was also used. Do you remember Crystal Pepsi?
Yeah, and I even remember the commercial you're talking about now.
Yeah, and that's what it was used for. See, they didn't have Crystal Pepsi in England, and they didn't show that commercial, but I remember reading about it, and I've gone back and seen the commercial and learned all about it and all that kind of stuff.
I also wonder, because you know how Pepsi always sponsors like the Super Bowl every year, and they do like a Pepsi commercial?
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, was that the Super Bowl commercial, I wonder if that was used at the Super Bowl.
I think it was. I think that's where they launched it.
Probably, because every year, so like, and even to this day, Pepsi will do what it's usually got musicians in it. And like, that's the famous one where Michael Jackson's hair caught fire.
Yes.
I think Beyonce one time got in trouble because she was saw drinking a Coke, but she did the Pepsi one that year. So yeah, I think that was the year that they did it. It would have been early 90s since it was the Crystal Pepsi.
Yeah, 1991.
Yeah, I would have been one, so it's not like I would have seen it when it happened. I'm speaking from now. Literally 1 year old.
Well, so this comes out in 1991, and off the back of this, there is a live album called Van Halen Live Right Here, Right Now. And that came out in 1993. And I bought this album originally I bought it in Woolworths in Hounslow, another place where I bought it. And one for you bingo card listeners out there.
It might be their first bingo card of the night.
There you go. And I listened to this over and over and over again, and I love this album. Everything about this live album, I knew all the tracks. And Rough Justice used to do a version of Won't Get Fooled Again, the Who song, which is covered on this album. The arrangement and the guitar technique all come from this. This is where it came from. Very pivotal to my music enjoyment and guitar playing career, and Eddie Van Halen's playing his Music Man guitar in there, and everything's fine and dandy. So roll forward a number of years when Sammy Hagar releases his autobiography. What does he say? He said that they got back from this tour and they wanted to do a live album. They listened to the tapes, And half the time, Eddie was drunk and his playing was sloppy. They said that the drums on it sometimes were a bit all over the place. So what did they do? They re-recorded everything on it. Sammy Hagar had already fallen out basically with the Van Halens at this point. He goes into a little recording studio somewhere where they played the whole concert live, and he said in one take he had his standard microphone he used on stage, re-sang the whole vocal, and that's what you hear on there. This has crowd noise on it. Is it live? No, it's not.
Wow. So speaking of Eddie Van Halen drunk, I've heard that there was a timeline where he was drunk pretty much every performance. And if I remember right, there's a YouTube video once I watched of him just being sloppy on stage.
Oh, it's
terrible.
The 2004 tour. So as we go through the timeline of these CDs, Sammy Hagar leaves, David Lee Roth comes back, Sammy leaves, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, there was a period of time where Sammy Hagar was back, 2004 reunion tour, and it was just it was a complete cash grab tour. There was a few token new tracks on a best of album, and they're not very good. And
it was because I knew it had to be pretty recent when I saw some of those videos.
Yeah, and Eddie was recreationally enhanced and drunk the whole time. He refused to wear a shirt for the whole tour. He wore these old shoes for the whole tour, and his playing was terrible, absolutely terrible. And of course, people go to see the band, and maybe you're kind of got a bit of a buzz on when you're watching it, and it probably doesn't seem so bad. But when you watch it in the sort of comfort of your own home, it is terrible when you think of how great Eddie Van Halen is.
And if you're watching it, and we'll have to find some of them because I've seen a few of them, there's very awkward interactions with him and the rest of the band because you can tell they're annoyed. Like they're over it. They're so over it. You can tell they're just like, dude, you're always like this. Please stop. Like it's a very interesting, like you can see kind of like facial expressions. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's written all over their body language. And while you, like you said, you're there, you've had a few drinks, you're in the music, you're not paying attention. But if you watch back now, it's super awkward to see.
Exactly. It's not good. And which is why, I mean, this next album I'm going to come onto, which is Balance from 1995. This album, basically Sammy had completely fallen out with the band. I think this was a contractual obligation album or something like that. But this was the sort of the final proper album that they released as a band.
Yeah.
And, when they did that 2004 reunion, I said it was like someone got their checkbook out and said, well, Mr. Hagar, if you join the Van Halens again, what does that cost? And I think it was one of those sort of things.
We've always said hell seems to freeze over real quickly when the checkbook comes out.
So 1995's Balance, which I bought in Our Price Records in Ealing, Broadway.
Such specific knowledge of where he bought his albums, everyone.
This, I think that the main track on here is probably Not Enough.
Yeah.
That's probably
I've heard that before.
Probably the main one. And the first time I ever heard Not Enough is when we had satellite TV and it had Dutch TV, and Dutch TV used to show David Letterman every night of the week, and then it was on there. But anyway, that's beside the point because we didn't get David Letterman in England. Anyway, this is a good album. It's got some great tracks. Amsterdam, Seventh Seal, Can't Stop Loving You, Don't Tell Me What Love Can Do, etc. But so I think Not Enough is, as I said, is probably the one that most people would recognize from this album.
I've probably heard Don't Tell Me What Love Can Do a few times too. I think that one's probably up there. Exactly. But you're right, Not Enough.
Exactly. So this is where the Sammy Hagar world ends for now. So Sammy leaves the band. He says, Mr. Van Halen's, we're off. So they came out with an album called Best of Volume 1, which is just a best of, and it has bits and bobs for all the albums that we've discussed. But they temporarily reunited with David Lee Roth. And this is
checkbook came out again.
Yeah, this is 1996. So they go back in the studio and they come out with two new tracks with Dave. Can't Get This Stuff No More and Me Wise Magic. Now, normally these best of extra tracks are terrible. This is good stuff. This is good, high quality David Lee Roth Van Halen music. And there's this whole scene where they reunited and they gave Beck an award at the MTV Awards, and then it all blew up backstage. And then this reunion lasted about 5 minutes. But we got
what a story.
Yeah, we got 2 tracks out of this, and I mean, the whole thing was worth it for these 2 tracks. And if you're into this kind of music, check them out. I said, can't get this stuff no more on Me Wise Magic. They are first class.
I'll have to add them to the playlist.
Yeah,
because I don't think I've heard either of them. I'm guessing though I would probably have to be looking for them to find them.
Yeah, they weren't singles or anything. They said they were 2 bonus tracks on a best of, but they are first class.
Makes sense.
Okay, so David Lee Roth is out again. Sammy Hagar's making tequila. And so Van Halen need a singer. And they auditioned a guy called Mitch Malloy, who was offered the gig, but after the whole thing that went down at the MTV Awards, he actually turned the gig down. And he wasn't a famous singer like Sammy Hagar, but he was around the scene and he jammed, and there's bootlegs out there of him playing with Van Halen, but it was a very short-lived thing. So what did they do? They shared managers with Extreme. So what did they do? They stole the singer from Extreme. You remember More Than Words and all that kind of stuff, mm-hmm. Gary Sharon. And they came out with the album Van Halen 3. Van Halen 3 is not a good album. Now, I like some of the tracks on it. Like Fire in the Hole is good. Without You's not too bad.
I don't think I've ever heard any of those songs.
Yeah, you don't even look into it. Well,
don't go out of my way.
But there is the worst ever track ever on this, and it's called How Many Say I. Now, if you imagine, now I
have to go find it.
Yes, you have to find this. If you imagine a piano ballad with Eddie Van Halen, who was probably intoxicated, sort of baritone singing through it, with Gary Sharon sort of doing a high warble over the top, and that's what you get. Is it an attempt at
a harmony?
It's terrible.
Okay. What a description, Tim.
It is very poor indeed.
Well, I will go find it just because I want to now, but I'll ignore the rest of the album.
Yeah, I think what we should do is actually post that up on the YouTube page. Maybe it's a comparison. It's like, this is Hot for Teacher, and this is How Many Say I.
Oh, Lord. I mean, that's not a bad idea, though. Oh, gosh. Well, I mean, at least they tried.
Yeah, it's poor. Anyway, so this came out. They toured the world with it. The live gigs were very good. As I said, I never got to go to it because they cancelled the UK dates. But I've seen videos and they're great. The album is terrible. And they went to start making a second album, and then Gary Sharon was like, "Peace. I don't think this is a good idea," and off he went back to Extreme.
Okay. I mean, I can't say I blame him. But it's not like Extreme was that famous either. I only know like 3 or 4 songs from them.
Yeah, I mean, you heard that album that I got you to listen to, Extreme 2 Pornograffiti.
Yeah, which was pretty good. I will say that.
Yeah,
but I mean, their main hits, I don't think they have that many out there.
Well, they're one of those bands that's like in the guitar community. They're probably much bigger than in the mainstream.
I guess that makes sense.
Okay.
And they were on Bill and Ted's, right? Great Adventure?
Yeah, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure soundtrack. You are correct.
That's what I thought.
play with. Yeah, the track Play With Me that has... Is it Beethoven in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure? And it has him in a music shop playing a synthesizer when, in fact, the sound is Nuno Bettencourt two-handed tapping on his guitar. I mean...
Yeah. I mean, that's probably what I know them more for. Probably watched that movie about 1,000 times now, to be honest.
That is a good film, and the soundtrack is good. Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey has the best rock soundtrack of any film ever, but the film is terrible.
Well, you win some, you lose some.
There you go. Anyhow, so as we almost wrap up this Van Halen topic, so we have to wait a few years. We have to wait 4 years. In that time, David Lee Roth rejoins Van Halen, and this time it's more of a permanent appointment. He's back in with the Van Halen brothers. He decides how he can coexist in their world and how they can exist in the David Lee Roth world, probably more importantly. And Michael Anthony, the bass player from Van Halen, is fired, though he doesn't know that. He reads it in a press release like everyone else did, which when it came as a shock to him apparently. And what happened? Michael Anthony, the bass player, was replaced by Eddie Van Halen's 15-year-old son, Wolfgang.
Yeah.
Now, at the time, everyone thought this was a terrible thing and it was like nepotism and blah, blah, blah. But in fact, Eddie Van Halen was not in a good place. And having his son in the band did actually give him a bit of extra life. It turned his life around to some degree, gave him something to be there for, and so he could make music with his son. So if we didn't have Wolfgang, yes, we didn't have the classic lineup, but we would have never had the tour and we would never have the album I'm about to speak about.
I mean, that does put some optimism to it.
Yeah. So they come out with A Different Kind of Truth album in 2012. Now, this features Wolfgang on bass and David Lee Roth and etc. The main track that you would probably know of here is Tattoo.
Yeah. I've heard that song.
Yeah, and that's probably not representative of the whole album. The rest of the tracks on it, the Tattoo was absolutely brand new. Mm-hmm. The rest of the tracks on here were demos that they had before Van Halen 1 was released. They were demo tracks that didn't make it to Van Halen 1. So they went back through the archives, found some of that old material, and then reworked it as new tracks for A Different Kind of Truth.
That's kind of cool, though, to at least use what you already have there.
Yeah, and that's
a little bit of the extra workout.
And that's why all this stuff sounds like classic. It sounds modern, but it sounds like classic Van Halen. It is. This is a good album, and we were lucky as Van Halen fans to get this because unfortunately there will be no more because we lost Eddie last year, but we do have A Different Kind of Truth.
But Tim, the question is, do you have Elvis on your elbow?
Yeah,
that's the real question.
Yeah, when I flex, Elvis walks.
So out there was like, what are they guys talking about? Go look up the song Tattoo.
And in fact, the whole song Tattoo is about the fact that David Lee Roth went to live in Japan for 2 years. And the only reason he did that is because he wanted to work with a famous Japanese tattoo artist. And they apparently have some kind of special tattoo inks that are only available in Japan. There's very traditional Japanese tattoos, and he wanted to have the same inks, and he wanted it to be done in a certain style, and he wanted to have it done by a certain tattoo artist. So most people would find someone in the United States who tattooed in that style. David Lee Roth lived in Japan for 2 years, learns to speak Japanese, and then gets almost his entire torso tattooed in Japan. But I mean,
we live a very different life.
Yeah, exactly.
Very different life. At least he knows what he wants.
There you go. That's Diamond Dave for you.
There you go.
Splendid. Well, there we are. That is a retrospective on the Van Halen catalog.
I feel like Tim's energy for this matches my energy for the Spice Girls, so it works well.
And I did resist the temptation to get too geeky with guitar stuff as well.
Though we appreciate it, Tim. We appreciate like I said, if Tim likes something, he has to next level like it. He can't just like it. So in some way, I appreciate that about you, whereas I am a jack of all trades in the sense that I have surface level knowledge of everything. Tim really knows all the details, especially with guitars and anything music, really.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, there's a lot of topics I know absolutely nothing about, but when it comes to guitars, especially electric guitars and a lot of music stuff, that is my jam, man.
I think Tim's seen my eyes gloss over before. Whenever it got a little too long, I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about anymore. Words. Yeah, guitar, sound, amp. Good. Just kidding. All right, I guess we'll leave it at that.
We will leave it there. We will catch you next week. See you later.
Bye.
Bye-bye.